This evening, we have a panel of speakers addressing the subject of Zimbabwe crisis, looking at the current political instability and the human rights abuses taking place there. Without further ado, I would like to present the panel of speakers. His Excellency, Dr. Seretse Khama, the former President of Botswana. Honorable Dumelang Salishando, leader of the main opposition coalition in Botswana, the Umbrella for Democratic Change, President of the Botswana Congress Party, Member of Parliament for Maung West constituency. We have Mthulisi Hanana, a Zimbabwean activist currently in exile. We have Dr. Mosweunyane of Socialist International Botswana, University of Botswana. We have Comrade Ketlhalefile Motshegwa, who is the Deputy Secretary General of Botswana Federation of Public, Private, and Parastatal Sector Unions. I will now hand over to the moderator this evening, Obakeng Matlou.
There is no sound.
Hi, Obakeng. Comrade Obakeng. There's no sound.
Come here. Shoot.
It's not working.
Comrade Aphiri, you're not audible.
Is there anything happening, comrade? Anything happening?
systems. Mm-hmm. Obakeng.
Am I audible?
Not at all. Yeah, better.
Yes, yes, you're audible.
Yes.
Someone is playing the music. May we kindly get the person to mute themselves?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, let's just get, I think, one or two other housekeeping matters out of the way. If you're watching this feedback on social media, it's best to mute the volume on social media so that we don't get a feedback. Please ensure that that is the case. And also just ensure that you've muted yourselves as well, and until such a time that you're called on to make a comment. Just so that at least you don't have all the other disturbing noises. Aphiri? Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can see that you're saying you can hear me, but I can't hear you. Because I wanted us to kickstart the program so that at least I get to hear you. I can't, so I can't make commentary on anything that you would have said.
Just ask those who have videos on to switch off videos. It helps reducing bandwidth usage.
Yeah, I guess the other guests as well, the other participants as well here may do so that at least we have a bit of a, if it does affect our communication here, so that at the very least the guests are the ones who are at the top of the pile. But I'm happy that at the very least, Mr. Hanana can hear me. Dr. Mosweunyane, you can also hear me, right?
Yes, I can.
KFC Motshegwa, you can hear me?
Yeah, we are together.
Well, if that is the case, then I think I'm quite happy for us to proceed so that at least we don't keep a lot of people, I think, waiting endlessly, because otherwise we will not be able to have anything achieved. I would hate a situation where we keep people for too long, or into either technical issues or some other guests not being part of this discussion when they were initially planned to be part of it. So that said, I think let me first apologize anyways let me just first of all start by apologizing to obviously the guests for starting a bit late than scheduled. I guess we are getting into the new normal. So we are beginning to understand and come to terms with the fact that we have technology to communicate with on a daily basis. So kindly bear with us, and we did apologize for the late start. But quickly just getting into today's discussion. My name is Obakeng, and I'll be your moderator for today. Obviously, as per the invitation, we did expect to have a couple of other people, namely the former president of the Republic of Botswana, His Excellency Dr. Khama, Seretse Khama, to be amongst us. We also did expect the leader of opposition.
I am here.
Oh, you are here?
Yeah, I'm here, yes.
Okay, no, thank you very much. I don't know for some reason that I didn't quite get to see you. Because I'm seeing different names. That's why maybe I wasn't able to. Apologies for that. Also, I expect the leader of opposition in Botswana being Mr. Dumelang Saleshando. I'm not too sure whether or not he is with us here because I don't get to see him. I take it he may not be with us at this particular time, but I guess we can still carry on. Without any further ado, let's just quickly get into today's discussion. As many of you know, so much has been said about the current political unrest in Zimbabwe for decades now. And today we have yet another matter that became a great subject of interest as well as of criticism on the government of Zimbabwe's handling of the diversion, be it in the media or in the or its political rivals. We have yet another situation unfolding in Zimbabwe, and it has been unfolding for some time. That seems to have sparked quite a lot of unrest in Zimbabwe following the arrest of a journalist, Hopewell Chinono's investigations on corruption allegations. So as many of you may be aware, Zimbabwe for many years has now been plagued with a lot of political instability for decades now, resulting in strife for vast majority of the ordinary citizens, as well as creating an unpleasant environment for conducting business in Zimbabwe. There has been a lot of coverage, both in the mainstream media, be it locally, regionally, or elsewhere, as well as on social media. The concern has been the same. What is the international community doing about the situation in Zimbabwe? What is the international community doing about the repression or otherwise that seems to be unfolding in Zimbabwe? Today, I'm pleased to be having capable panelists to tackle this very important and very concerning matter that is unfolding in Zimbabwe. So the question that we wish to establish from the outset is there a crisis in Zimbabwe? That's the first question that we wish to establish. And the other issues we'll get into as time goes on. So before we actually get to start on those other issues that I've just raised, I just wish to give our guests that I've acknowledged here, there's about four of them at the very least. I'm going to afford you an opportunity to make opening statements, 2 minutes each. I'll start with His Excellency, former President of the Republic of Botswana, Dr. Seretse Khama, to make your opening remarks, 2 minutes opening remarks, if you may.
Thank you very much. And I hope you can hear me.
Loud and clear.
Good. I just want to start off by commending this initiative that is going to put the plight of the long-suffering people of Zimbabwe into the spotlight. Let me start by referring quickly to an issue that has been a recent development where we saw an ANC delegation traveling to Zimbabwe to meet their ZANU-PF counterparts. And where the ZANU-PF official, as always, was in denial by saying that there was no crisis in the country and that they just really acknowledged that and said they only discussed challenges that affect both countries. And therefore, as there was no conflict, there was no need for mediation. So I just want to explain that the word challenge refers to a difficult situation, usually temporary in nature, that can be fairly easily overcome. However, the word crisis refers to a situation of, I would say, intense or extreme difficulty that is usually long-lasting. And both of these, challenges and crises, in most cases are man-made. In the same briefing, the ZANU-PF official referred to themselves and the ANC as former liberation movements. My reflection is that these liberation movements sacrificed their time, resources, and even their lives to rid their countries of minority rule and the oppression that was imposed on the majority. Of course, oppression means the denial to equal opportunity imposed by some on others. And in the case of Zimbabwe, that included, but was not limited to, issues of health, education, jobs and economic activity, land, and free participation in the political dispensation of that country. These policies of oppression were enforced by brutality, cruelty, and incarceration by the Smith regime. This led to many of the majority seeking refuge and opportunities in other lands. Today, however, and sadly, Zimbabwe follows a similar pattern, and in some cases worse, for the long-suffering people. The corruption, the gross mismanagement of the economy, massive unemployment, blatant intolerance of alternative views, beatings, brutality, abductions, incarcerations of journalists, politicians from other parties, lawyers, and many other people, and still many Zimbabweans moving outside the country as a result of all this, clearly indicate that today, 40 years since independence, the only thing that has changed is the name of the country and that of its leaders. In plain English, there is a crisis in Zimbabwe, not just challenges, with extreme difficulty, all man-made, and growing in intensity and long-lasting. That's why that ZANU-PF official used the word crisis almost 14 times at one stage, more than any other word in that briefing. A leader has one responsibility and one only, and that is to mobilize and motivate programs and policies in the best interest of citizens and not in their self-interest. People's lives matters. Zimbabweans' lives matter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, His former President. I'll, in this particular time, to give Dr. Mosweunyane to make his opening remarks.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I just do concur that Zimbabwe has crisis really that needs to be addressed. But even something that is more disheartening is that this has been going on for a long time. Zimbabweans have been persecuted, the atrocities that are known of for a very long time. And this has only not affected Zimbabwe because it had also affected neighboring countries.
In your feedback there, I don't know whether you've got something playing in the background. So there's a bit of a feedback there. If you may kindly just mute that so that at least you are audible. I think we're struggling to hear you, or the noise is a bit too much in the ear. Thank you.
Okay, I was just saying that I do agree that Zimbabwe is really facing a very serious situation that needs to be addressed. It's in a pandemonium situation, and it cannot be let off to go on like that for long because it has been subjected to this for way too long by its leaders. And this is not only affecting Zimbabwe because even neighboring countries are getting affected as a result of the atrocities that are being meted out against people of Zimbabwe. We know very well that Zimbabwe is part of SADC, and therefore, if there are economic problems in Zimbabwe resulting from mismanagement of the economy there, it does affect neighboring countries as well. And if you look at SADC, which its whole intention was to forge development for the region, it is now been pulled down by Zimbabwe, which is a sore. And of course, this needs to be addressed. We know that some attempts were being made, like the imposition of sanctions on Zimbabwe. This was meant to, in a way, get the leaders to commit to making sound decisions so that Zimbabwe can be saved from the mud in which it is submerged at the moment. So it is very important that we have to make an assessment of the impact this embargo has made, or the sanctions have made, and see if there is no need to probably restructure the sanctions and maybe make them more targeted to the leaders, because these sanctions have resulted in ordinary people who don't make decisions suffer. We have seen a lot of Zimbabweans having to flee their country, and this requires, therefore, that there has to be, we had to visit the sanctions and make sure that they're crafted in a way that they will be impactful, they'll be purposeful, and they'll really get the leaders to face the music. And this would be very important because it will be also sending a very clear message to would-be recalcitrants that their behavior would not be in any way tolerated. And of course, we know that some efforts have been made by some countries, and thus we're isolated. We never really had a very strong voice from the region to communicate to Zimbabwe that what's happening to the people of Zimbabwe is not desirable at all. I think what has to be done, if I was to make my own views regarding how the leadership in Zimbabwe should be dealt with, I will advocate for a situation where there will be a travel ban, because that will deal directly with the leaders themselves, where their bank accounts would be frozen so that they can feel the brunt of what they have engineered themselves. So it is very important that we've got to be loud and be alive to the fact that the suffering of ordinary people have been aggravated by the conditions that they have been subjected to, even by the international community, by imposing sanctions on Zimbabwe. We know that there was, well, when this was really got to its start, there were complaints that the white minority had annexed, there was encroachment on the land of Zimbabweans. And at the end, land was ruthlessly taken from those who were put into good production. And I am not of the view that that was a good move at all. It was not a good decision at all. Because what I think should have been done should have probably been to tax people who own land, so that those who don't profit from its ownership can therefore give it back to the state. And the whole exercise was made to satisfy the greed of certain individuals who are in leadership positions and who are responsible for the decisions that were seen take Zimbabwe into its economic slum. And politically, Zimbabwe is politically disintegrated, it's shattered, and it's ruthlessly ruled by a certain minority. And that when Zimbabwe was liberated, people were hopeful. I think they were highly optimistic, and their country will work for them. And they will be highly industrious in getting to be productive in the manner they could be, so that at the end, Zimbabwe can be that which they have yearned for in fighting for its liberation. So it is really disheartening, it is disturbing that little has been said about shaping Zimbabwe and getting it back to its feet. The only thing we've heard from the leaders have been the polemics.
All those thoughts, Dr. Mosweunyane, we'll get into the crux of them. I just wanted to lay down, I think, your statements and your remarks, your opening remarks, that we can get into details just a little later. I think let me just allow in this particular time as well, Ketlhalefile Motshegwa to also make his opening remarks. I think I'll be fair because so far they both guests have made up to 5 minutes, so I'll give you your 5 minutes as well to make your opening remarks.
All right, thank you very much. We start by offering our solidarity to our brothers and sisters in Zimbabwe. And further to continue to say, as a class-conscious federation and internationalist federation, we are ideologically compelled to comment on the Zimbabwean situation on a humanitarian basis, and further on account of solidarity and internationalism, like I have stated. And we do note and acknowledge that there is an atrocious political problem in Zimbabwe that is unfolding as also an economic problem, and it has been there for the longest time. This, we are saying, has consequently become a socio-economic problem engulfing the people of Zimbabwe, where we are seeing abuse of political power and assault on democracy, whereby a vicious and inhumane regime has unleashed brutality and state terrorism on its people, where we see innocent women, children, who are becoming victims of beatings, trepidation, displacement, poverty, and hunger. And as a federation, we are saying, we painfully note that trade leaders, journalists, opposition activists, they are being beaten and imprisoned for merely voicing alternative to the voice and misdeeds of government. Sadly, violence upon political opponents has become a political culture in Zimbabwe, because like I said, this has been going for the very longest time. And the situation has affected the state of development as we witness putrefying health system and other social services to the impairment of the lives of Zimbabweans. What is more concerning is that while Zimbabwe is burning, there is deafening silence across Africa, predominantly Southern Africa, with certain countries that are bordering Zimbabwe. And we are saying this is a clear authentication that there is a serious leadership problem in Africa, that the leaders in Africa have reduced themselves into some sort of a delinquent club of tyrants, as old ruling political parties, they buddy and protect each other. That is why even when we have a serious problem in Zimbabwe, we can hear, or none of the leaders are coming out clear to condemn the situation in Zimbabwe, because the starting point will be to condemn the situation. And out of there, then we'll be able to develop solutions going forward. So we are saying these leaders, they are not assisting the situation, because we say in politics or in government, you don't necessarily need atomic bombs to destroy a nation, but bad leadership and politicians who value their pockets than the lives of the citizens will obviously be a remedy for disaster. So obviously, as a federation based in Botswana, we are concerned by the silence of our leadership in the country with regard to the situation in Zimbabwe. And lastly, like I said, the challenge is not only with the leaders, but also the international institutions such as African Union, SADC, and so forth, who have now become talk shows without tangible solutions with regard to their mandate as far as building peace, stability in Africa is concerned. That is why we had global programs such as peer review mechanism that were meant to allow leaders to check themselves as to how they are faring with regard to political progress. So such initiatives have failed because the leaders did not want to subject themselves to scrutiny. And in that way, the institutions in Africa are not coming out clean in terms of their role in ensuring peace, stability, and so forth. So in a nutshell, what I'm saying is that there's a crisis in democracy. The situation has been bad from former regimes, and even up to now, it is continuing. And the challenge is that even regionally, there's a problem of Zimbabwe. So this is not the problem of leadership. So this must be viewed in the context of leadership in Africa and the lack of effectiveness of international institutions in Africa. That is why at some point Robert Mugabe told his political opponent that there's nothing that they can do, because when they go to SADC or African Union, they'll find him chairing the sessions. So there's nothing they can do.
Thank you very much, Mr. Motshegwa, for the opening remarks. Let me allow Mr. Hanana to also make his opening remarks, if you may. I don't know whether that's Mr. Hanana or somebody else who's joining us, because I would really appeal to everyone who may be joining us to ensure that as soon as you join us, please mute yourself so that at least you don't disturb the ongoing discussions. Mr. Hanana, if you may. Mr. Hanana, it would seem I'm not able to hear you. I'm not too sure whether the other members, the other participants here are able to hear you. Are you able to hear Mr. Hanana?
No.
So I guess, please, as you try to sort out the your audio issues, I think let me just quickly jump onto, I think, the remarks that have already been made. I think let me just start with you, former president. I think let me just pick you up from, I think, your earlier contributions with regard to your statement. I think from what I am sensing, you are all unanimous that indeed there is a crisis in Zimbabwe. But I think let me rather say you to, because you have been part of this, and you've also led Botswana, and not only just Botswana, but I think Botswana during your time as well as the president. You did become the chair, man of the. Our country did become the chair of SADC. I'm very much interested in what you believe has been, at least at the very least, successes that I think SADC has had over the years with regards to the issues in Zimbabwe.
That's a very difficult question to answer, because as you were asking it, I was just trying to rush through my mind what those could have been. Because really, if there had been success, if there had been any successes, Zimbabwe wouldn't be in the position that it is in today. What we can say is that there have been attempts at trying to achieve some kind of successes. And I think the GPA was one of them, where you saw ZANU-PF and the MDC coming into government together. Although it wasn't a perfect solution. And as soon as that was over, there was a bit of improvement during that period. But as soon as it ended, we were just back to square one. So unfortunately, I cannot put my finger on any successes. And like I said, because if there had been, we certainly wouldn't be sitting here today discussing the situation there.
If I was to make just a quick follow-up on that one as well, I mean, like, what do you honestly think, seems to be, hampering SADC from being effective as far as, at the very least, addressing the issues within the region is concerned? In particular, I'd like for us to focus to focus on Zimbabwe. Why has SADC struggled to be able to apply themselves as far as just being able to offer very practical solutions, or at least direction, with regards to the matters that have always unfolded in Zimbabwe?
The problem is that one of your previous speakers indicated it's to do with leadership, that there isn't that sense of having to lead by example and say, we've got these SADC protocols that talk about democracy, but when it comes to implementing it, we were just paying lip service to what we think should be done in SADC when it comes to democracy. There's also the element of solidarity, because some of the countries in SADC, as you heard the ZANU-PF official I was talking about when he was making his briefing, he talked about the former liberation movements. And there is that sort of club, if I can call it that, between those countries which had governments now who fought wars of liberation, who don't want, because of the close network that developed between them during those challenging times. They have, you get the sense that they have that feeling that they don't want to be the ones to stand up and criticize another sister party or sister organization who were involved in the liberation struggle. Because when I spoke to some of them, and please don't ask me to mention who they were, in private, they would condemn what was going on in Zimbabwe. They didn't like what was going on in Zimbabwe and kept saying something had to be done. But when we got drowned in a meeting in SADC, that didn't happen to be the case. And I can remember former President Mugabe occasionally hinting at the fact that, you know, countries should kind of mind their own business. Zimbabwe is a sovereign country, like we are all sovereign countries. And this constant wanting to put Zimbabwe on the SADC agenda, and there should be some kind of mediation, and I think he looked at it as interference. It's similar to when President Ramaphosa recently sent 2 envoys to Zimbabwe with intention to meet with the MDC as well. That didn't come about because I think when they met the government, right as their first stop, I think they were told that, look, we don't welcome this kind of intervention.
Yeah, let me just quickly interject there, former President. But I'm interested because, I mean, sometimes we hear all of these things. So I don't know, you know, how, because you've been part of it as well. The issue of playing the sovereign card, could be used as some sort of an excuse, if I may put it like that, for other international organizations that are indeed have the right to be able to have interest in ensuring that Zimbabwe has some level of or semblance of stability. Could it be that they may be overusing or overplaying the card of sovereignty?
Of course. I mean, if you just heard recently, the goings on, like I made this reference to the ZANU-PF official. If you listen to what he said, you could see they were clearly quite irritated, if I can put it that way, that a delegation would have been coming to Zimbabwe to try and mediate on what is obviously a crisis, a conflict. And they took exception to that. They took strong exception to that. And that's why the whole purpose of the meeting was then sidelined and moved to talk about justice instead of talking about the crisis. And
kindly, sorry, President, could I kindly request that everyone mutes themselves, please, because it is causing a lot of unnecessary disturbance. Please, as we join, kindly mute yourself. Lisa, if you may, mute yourself. Sorry, former President, you may go ahead.
Yes, so the point I was making was that they're in this mindset of denial. And when anyone wants to come across and say to them, look, there's a crisis, there's a conflict, they don't see it like that. They don't want to see it like that. They want the situation to be able to continue with them firmly in control, and any attempt by anybody from the outside, they would look upon it as violating their sovereignty, interfering in their affairs.
Could I just quickly clarify here? I just want to establish, hasn't there been a discussion around the practical approaches that SADC itself could play in terms of being able to assist and have a very efficient role in terms of just being able to fight, especially the instabilities within its member states? I mean, hasn't that discussion been engaged in so that there is pragmatic measures that one could, SADC could actually get into to ensure that, there is a level of engagement with the state that would be in question to say, you know what, we are not going to allow a situation like this. So the issue of saying, you know what, I'm a sovereign country and therefore I would not entertain any interventions by especially SADC could not be entertained.
But you know, when it was attempted, and maybe some of the reasons why SADC wasn't that successful was because they would then draw back when they were faced by obvious demonstration of resentment by the Zimbabwean government to any attempt to bring about an intervention in the political situation in that country. So people would stand back. And don't forget, when we talk about SADC, we're talking about 14, 15 countries. It's not, you know, one bloc as a nation. So every leader has a different opinion. And you could certainly see those who just felt it must be hands off Zimbabwe. Hands off. I can tell you for a fact, because at one of the elections where we sent observers from Botswana came and told me that other SADC observers from one particular country who will remain unnamed told them when they were having discussions with them that we were told when we left our country that whatever we see going wrong in the elections, we must still say the elections were free and fair. That is the problem that we are facing.
All right, thank you so much, His Excellency, for your remarks. I think let me just bring you in here, Dr. Mosweunyane, because I think you had already started outlining, I think, the topic that we are currently holding, which is obviously you are in agreement that there is a crisis in Zimbabwe. I'd love for you to also just explicate, I think, your earlier submissions with regards to some of the solutions as well. I think His Excellency as well has already spoken to some of the issues and the challenges that I think Zimbabwe is facing. What do you reckon are some of the practical measures that SADC itself should be able to administer such that there is a level of sense of that in quite some time?
I think what's required is really firstly for SADC to admit that there is a problem, and of course to take a very mindful, precise decision on how this situation should be dealt with. There has to be some kind of accord, some kind of agreement on how the situation should be dealt with. But firstly, as I've mentioned, it is important for the members to admit.
The great member to SADC itself, some level of agreement that says, should we experience economic or otherwise?
I can hear you very well from that side, but let me say that.
Guys, there is a lot of disturbance. Please mute yourself so that at least there isn't any disturbance. Please, kindly, if you may. Dr. Mosweunyane, what I was just saying is, in terms of just, I think, picking up that, I was just saying, the membership itself, that one state is a member itself, isn't that enough to be saying, and therefore SADC does qualify for it to be able to have a say in one of the member states, to be able to say whether it's an issue of political instability, development, or you name it, that therefore that alone allows SADC to be able to have some say. Please unmute yourself. Dr. Mosweunyane, unmute yourself.
Okay, I think what has to happen is for SADC to revisit its conditions, to say if a country has to be a member of SADC, there are certain prescriptions that it should adhere to, because there seems to be a very serious problem of disqualifying members that don't seem to meet the standards that are already there, because they would say, well, they're all members, they've got equal rights to exercise their liberties within this organization. And I think if there were certain stipulates that were in existence to guide how SADC should operate, it would have long disqualified Zimbabwe. But they cannot, because there are no such measures in place to make sure that SADC at the end of the day, is run for the benefit of its member states. I think the other thing also has to do with the liberation movements, because there were liberation movements in the continent, and at the end, when they defeated...
I'd like to pick you for that, Dr. Mosweunyane. Isn't the fact that the SADC itself hasn't been disbanded, it then goes without saying that there are conditions that the member has to stay. I mean, if you are to extend the analogy that we have been, we have used of a club, surely if club members are able to actually disqualify a member of the, one of their members, surely at the high level of the states, what we are talking about countries, they should certainly be able to disqualify a member, or at least take some level of steps to correct the situation that in this particular case we find Zimbabwe in. Surely that.
Sorry for the interruption, but I think they have not been able to do that because they view themselves as a club of people who have achieved the assignment which they had before them, that was of liberating the continent. And they've done that. And that is why the former president of Zimbabwe was praised when he was seeing the polemics against the Western powers, because that is the understanding that they were against the Western powers. And with that done, they did not commit themselves to developing the continent as they should. So SADC is just a club of member states that at the end of the day are not geared towards making any form of transformation, because at the end, we don't see them taking decisive measures against Zimbabwe, which they should have long taken measures against, which would include, for instance, to advocate for disqualification of Zimbabwe from SADC, but also maybe having amplified their voice to make sure that they get the assistance that's required from the international community. We have seen sanctions.
On that issue, Dr. Mosweunyane, you think that it should have been worthy for Zimbabwe to have been extend a bit of that as well and say, if we are to, let's assume that that was the case with Zimbabwe, and indeed it was disqualified, wouldn't that therefore then still go back and then affect even the most ordinary of people, because they're not the ones who are actually perpetrating, they are being perpetrated against by the state? Would that even be the most effective way to go forward, do you think?
Yeah, well, it's just, of course, it would achieve the same results that you got at the moment, where we have sanctions imposed in the country, and a lot of people who there at the end of the day suffer are the ordinary people who don't have the means. And I think we need to revisit the sanctions and make sure that they're immediately lifted, and then we can maybe advocate for the kind of well-targeted, purposeful, impactful, punitive measures, which will then be for the leaders. Just like I said, the travel ban could be one of those, and then freezing their accounts, which in that case would mean they will not be able to travel and they will not be as privileged as they are at the moment. And I think part of the reason why they don't seem to take much care of what's going on there is because they benefit just because they do have the means. And of course, they continue to siphon resources because of the disorderliness and because there is this top-heavy, this pandemonium situation in the country, which wouldn't be the case if there was normality, if the country was run very well. And I think part of the problem why SADC doesn't address the problem is because individual countries within the SADC region do benefit from what's going on in Zimbabwe by way of brain drain, as if I'm allowed to do that. Because we've seen a lot of Zimbabweans leave the country. And most of those who have left the country are not ordinary people. We are talking about people with expertise who get to benefit individual countries. Like we had cases of xenophobia in South Africa. And this is because expats from Zimbabwe had migrated to these countries. Even in the first world, you would find Zimbabweans there working as doctors, engineers. And it really gets to assist those countries. And that is why they would continue with the sanctions as they are at the moment, and not target the people who are really causing problems because they are decision makers.
I think we'll expand on that. I think, Doctor. I think let me just quickly just give Mr. Hanana an opportunity to weigh in as well, if he's this time around audible, before I move to maybe the other one. Mr. Hanana, are you audible? Could you just maybe give it a shot? No, we are not winning. We are still not winning because you're not audible. Mr. Motshegwa, I think let me just move quickly as well to you. You know, the issue, I think that the two doctors are bringing up in Dr. Khama and Dr. Mosweunyane, it's obviously the issue of the role that SADC plays. But I'd like to nudge you a bit away from just SADC itself. But I wish to have you engaged on what do you think the people of Zimbabwe themselves could actually do that is practical before we actually go and expand on the issue of SADC and the role that they can play.
Yeah, thank you very much. What the people need to do should be in the context that what we need is at a continental and regional level, we need effective dispute resolution systems for conflict resolution in an endeavor to build lasting peace for citizens and the continent, and thereby paving way for political stability, tranquility, and economic prosperity. So to get back to your question specifically, is that in order for us to move forward as the people in SADC, Africa, and to be specific, Zimbabwe, the people need to be involved. But you will note and realize that for the longest time, the people in Zimbabwe, civic society composed of journalists, trade unions, and so forth, they have been involved. They've been in the trenches. They've been voicing out and demonstrating against the state of affairs in Zimbabwe. In my opinion, the people of Zimbabwe have done well in terms of their role in dealing with the situation. That is why somehow I don't believe in the continued sanctions on Zimbabwe, because ultimately it is the ordinary people who will feel the burden of these sanctions, whereas the political leadership continue to enjoy their lives as they were before. So what I'm trying to say is that the people are trying to do what they can do at their level, but the larger part of the burden lies with the leadership of the country to say, leadership is about providing guidance. Leadership is about Obakeng, unmute.
Sorry, Ramasam. I'm talking and I'm thinking that actually you can hear me. So I was just saying,
Yeah.
I apologize for that. I was just saying, you know what? In terms of, I think the people of Zimbabwe, I think we've all seen what the people of Zimbabwe have been able to do. I think they've been able to put quite a decent effort in terms of that. And the problem is the fact that the current regime and even the past ones, they have been unreceptive to counsel either of SADC or anybody from the international community. Then how can we, therefore, the people from either international community practically help the people of Zimbabwe to be able to get out of this particular quagmire that they are in?
Yeah, we need continued efforts of civic society in Zimbabwe. We need strong civic society in Zimbabwe. We need solidarity from civic society in other countries, international bodies and so forth, so that we continue to put Zimbabwean news in terms of what is going there. But like I said, the bulk of responsibility lies with the leadership in Zimbabwe, leadership in SADC. That is why my take is that when we talk about the role of SADC, its successes and failures on the Zimbabwean question, the starting point should be what is the composition of SADC in terms of leadership? The other time there was a meeting between the leaders of Botswana, Zimbabwe, I forget the other country. They met in Zimbabwe to discuss Mozambique, to discuss the situation in DRC. So that's laughable because there's a crisis in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is chairing a meeting to discuss the situation in DRC. You get to Swaziland, there's a crisis in Swaziland. You get to Lesotho, there's a crisis in Lesotho. So these are the countries and leaders who compose SADC, and we are saying they should preside over matters that are similar to crisis in their country. So the changes that are to be made at the level of SADC must start at the level of countries themselves, whereby we must see free and fair elections that bring legitimate government. And those government must be people-orientated. So even people...
I think, Mr. Mosweunyane, you see the issue of free and fair elections. I think let's agree that it is not practical as far as Zimbabwe is concerned. I remember very well, if I was to take an example that I think earlier on was referred to by a former president. There was a time that I think Remy Rafi and Dr. Pandus Kelemani at the time happened to have been the delegates to go and observe in one of the elections there, I think it's 2020, just before 2013, thereabout. But they came back and they said, you know what, the elections were not free and fair, while the rest of the other people were lauding them as fair. So clearly the issue of fair and fair elections can't quite exactly be put up as some possible solution, because that is not happening.
Yeah, that's why I was saying that what we are discussing here has now become a political culture in Zimbabwe. So you need to bring about political reforms. We start with the constitution, the laws and so forth, regulating elections and other institutions, so that at foundational level, the laws and the constitution are such that they will guarantee for free and fair elections. And that includes institutions themselves, including judiciary, the electoral body. There seem to be some sound there.
Could somebody please, someone is disturbing, could you kindly just, apologize, could you just mute yourself, please? Go ahead, Mr. Mthulisi.
So I was saying that should extend to institutions such as judiciary, the electoral body, which have a role to play in elections there. So what I was trying to say is that this has become a political culture. That is why you hear this notion of liberation movements every time the government are called to account. But we need to say to them that maybe they preside over political liberation there. But now we are facing a different kind of liberation. The people need economic rights. The people need good governance and so forth. So it's not enough, and it will not help them to continue to be basking under the glory of the history of being labor, liberation movements and so forth. We must confront current challenges as governments in Africa or Southern Africa, rather than continuous reference to the past of liberation movements and so forth.
I think we'll get back to to that subject and discuss it a bit more. Let me just go back to former president and pick his brain. And I think to your credit, let me just be upfront with this one here, because I think you, to your credit, indeed, during your time, you were quite very vocal about the issues in Zimbabwe, and you were clearly able to condemn them without fear or favor. But I'm very much interested to see, what do you think the people of Zimbabwe, at the very least, could be assisted so that at least this particular issue that has been plaguing them for so many decades could at least get some sort of a solution, if I could put it like that?
You know, I think the people of Zimbabwe have displayed tremendous tolerance of the situation they are in. I sometimes ask myself, what is it? You know, that they are so, I must say, one must really commend them for how they have been able to put up with this crisis in their lives on a daily basis, going on for weeks, months, and years. And really, the solution, you see, with themselves, is that every time they try to go onto the streets or protest, they get brutalized. They get locked up. Yes, you could say if every one of them agreed, they could engage in peaceful protest, withholding their labor, not going to work, so that this would be felt by the people in that regime. But really the key is the rest of us outside of Zimbabwe, the SADCs, the AUs, the rest of the international community. We have said it, because I think the people in Zimbabwe have tried and tried and tried. They've tried to participate in the elections. You know, when we talk about SADC, I think Mr. Motshegwa has hit the nail on the head so many times. He has been so accurate in how he has defined the situation in that country and what needs to be done, especially when he talked about SADC. Who is SADC? And I said to you before, it's not just one country. You know, you've got those countries which have had those problems, and continue to have problems. The DRCs, during the height of some of the problems during the time of Mugabe, you had Lesotho going on, you had Madagascar going on. And so you can't turn to these same people and expect them, when they've got problems in their own countries, to solve problems in other people's countries. And like you said, and I thank you for recognizing the effort that I tried to make. But when I would stand up and say anything, we would be frowned upon by other countries in SADC. That was the mindset. That was the mentality. They frowned upon what we did. When the late Mugabe was introduced at SADC meetings, you know, we would go to SADC summits and we'd all be introduced one by one. Whenever he was introduced, standing ovations, applause. And you would say, if you people lived in Zimbabwe, you wouldn't be standing up and applauding this man. But he was sort of the darling of the region, the darling of the continent.
Right there, Mr. President. I'm wondering, you have been part of this. I'm just wondering sometimes that I could have been that fly on the wall. Do you, as presidents, have these very frank and candid conversations, either on the sides or formally within the platform, to say, you know what, we are not going to allow, I think we are past the era where we're going to allow a certain state to essentially just bring SADC into disrepute and not be able to conduct business. Do you hold these very candid conversations on the sides or even formally against certain states within SADC?
Of course, yes, we had that. There were a couple of them where we would sit down and I would discuss with them this very issue, and they were fully on board. But then when you got into public or into the summit forum, they would draw back. They would not say in public what they had told me in private. And you know, what is so disappointing is that we would have these SADC protocols, as I said before. There were guidelines on how to conduct elections in the SADC region, and Zimbabwe violated those guidelines, and nothing was done or said about it. And those last elections that we referred to earlier, that you referred to, they were where there was obvious rigging, but there was no violence that time round. They were passed off as free and peaceful instead of free and fair. So when you have that kind of problem, where there's no admission of what is going on the ground, and nobody is prepared to stand up and say anything, and those who do, like ourselves, were frowned upon. Merafe, you referred to, General Merafe, the late, he referred to the last elections that time as a circus, and they were. And we put in a report of our findings and how rigging had taken place to the SADC summit, and it was ignored.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd like to take you back to the fact that, by the way, I think many of us sometimes, I think even when we discuss some of these issues, I think around Zimbabwe sometimes, we are quick to forget that, by the way, the current regime anyways, or at least the current leader at the very least, came about as a result of a coup. And here I'm sitting here and wondering, how could something like that be allowed to happen within SADC, and it would be, it's just accepted as normal, and there is absolutely nothing, that could be done. So I think as a leader, I understand that the sanctions by the West are extant. They are still there. Would you still think that it would be ineffective to also employ SADC sanctions that are targeted?
Of course, totally. I think one of your speakers earlier on talked about targeted sanctions. I agree that general sanctions are not good because they do harm the population. But targeted sanctions are very, very effective. The travel bans on those leaders, very effective. Offshore accounts frozen, very effective. And even the possibility of suspension from for a period of time from international organizations would also be very effective. They need to know that they cannot continue in this line. I mean, how long, as you said already, are we going to be sitting talking about Zimbabwe? And we are seeing these poor people, coming across, going into any number of neighboring states and even further afield abroad because of the situation there. How long does it go on for? So, I don't want to say we always have to be pointing fingers at what should the people of Zimbabwe do. I think they've been trying their best. They really have been trying their best under a very difficult situation. But the rest of the international community, and especially those in the region and on the continent, they need to step up. But many of them, you look at Cameroon, what's going on in Cameroon. I mean, you can't expect them to do anything. Look what's going on in Egypt. You can't expect them to do anything. And there are other examples like that on the continent where those people are not going to come on board to do anything about it.
Dr. Mosweunyane, I mean, I'm sitting here baffled, actually, to say, can we even recognize the current government in Zimbabwe as legitimate? Because clearly, SADC is not even saying anything about it. And we all know what transpired even during the so-called elections in inverted commas. Why is this so normal? Can we even consider it?
I think it's normal primarily because there are those other leaders in the SADC region who wants to emulate the Zimbabwean leaders. So if elections are not being conducted well in a given country, and some other countries don't immediately react against that, it can be an indication that they want to do the same as well, and they want to be seen not to be the only ones doing it, because they'll be under cover of Zimbabwe having done it, and therefore they will not stand out vividly as those who had violated the laid down democratic values. And I think I'm rather puzzled that some of the leaders are not being taken to the ICC, for instance, because I think if that body was acting frankly and it was acting not in a selective manner, they would have taken some leaders from Zimbabwe to the ICC, because they've meted out atrocities against innocent people.
If ICC was to even think about doing that, there has been this backlash to say, oh, you know what, you're only concentrating on Africa, or why don't you consider other first world countries as well where they violate human rights, for instance? I mean,
but I think
there's been an issue with the issue of saying, you know what, the Iraqi in 2001 wasn't supposed to have happened and everything else. And the people, there are certain quarters who hold the view that, you know, those people who actually led the invasion of Iraq were supposed to have been held before The Hague, but that didn't happen. Now, why should we think that they would, you know, people would not raise those objections with regards to Zimbabwe if you're to consider The Hague?
No, we've got just to be mindful of the fact that, that there's also a class issue here. The people who say the ICC is rather selective and it's not really getting to deal with people on an equal basis are those people who are privileged themselves. It's not the ordinary people saying that. And I think ICC has a mandate. And if Zimbabwe qualifies, its leaders qualify to be taken before it, they should be. It's not for them to be uttering polemics to say they don't qualify. Because some of the people or some of the leaders who say ICC doesn't function well are themselves culprits. They're actually doing the same thing which is going on in Zimbabwe. And some of them are actually those Zimbabwean leaders. And I think ICC should frankly take its mandate seriously and make sure that they really get whoever is implicated in atrocities against the people. Those who murder their people that they're supposed to lead before it for trial. And if that is done, I think it would in a way get to curb would-be offenders. They will really know it will serve as a deterrent measure against some leaders who will be willing to emulate Zimbabwe. Because it's not only Zimbabwe where elections get rigged. We know in some countries even where elections are said to be free and fair, there is no fairness at all in allowing other people to exercise their liberties, to exploit the democratic rights in participating in such elections. So it is very important that we've got to allow bodies that are established to bring normality to take their responsibilities. And ICC is one of those. And of course, we have not got to be deterred by the polemics that have been sung by the very people who at the end of the day laid down statutes from such bodies.
I think we are able to diagnose the problems in Zimbabwe and even be able to come up with some remedial measures, to put it like that. It would seem there's an issue, a serious issue, with having to administer remedial measures as far as being able to say, yes, indeed, we have identified problem X, but therefore we suggest that the solution could be Y. Why is this very difficult for the bodies, either the African bodies from AU, all the way to other regional bodies within Africa, all the way to SADC, so difficult for them to be able to actually implement these remedial measures?
Well, the problem is actually to do with the behavior of the very people who are supposed to get these institutions to work. Part of the problem is that they are also not clean. So at the end of the day, they can't point an accusing finger at Zimbabwe because they are equally recalcitrant of certain political behaviors that cannot be tolerated. I think we've got to get these bodies that are in existence to work. Like I've said, the sanctions, for instance, if you impose sanctions that are well targeted, there are certain countries that are going to be disadvantaged by that exercise, in that they do have accounts in those countries that have got to run and generate some income for those countries. And some of the accounts of the leaders in Zimbabwe are actually housed in international financial institutions. And of course, if we can just get ourselves out of that greed and get to do things in a fair and in be mindful of the suffering that Zimbabwean people are going against, there will really be some remedial measures that will be put in place that are valuable. But at the moment, the problem is also, as I've said, is because of brain drain. Because if Zimbabwe runs very well, it means some of the experts that we've got in those foreign countries that are making the economies to be more functional are going to be getting back to Zimbabwe. And some of the countries wouldn't like to see that happen. So it's just because of the greed, the human greed.
Can I comment on the IC?
I think, yeah, you can go ahead, His Excellency. You can go ahead. In fact, I was going to go back to you about this. While you do that, let me also just give you a bit of a takeaway as well on that one. Because I wanted to bring it home as well to see what role have you been happy with the role that Botswana as a country has played as you respond to Dr. Mosweunyane.
Right. The International Criminal Court, ICC, they have three methods of referring people before them. One is by the United Nations Security Council. And I'm not aware that they have ever referred someone to the ICC, because in the UN Security Council, you've got some permanent members like United States of America who have not signed up to the Rome Statute. So they don't agree with the ICC, the concept. And even recently, you remember that the ICC was looking into atrocities carried out by American military in Afghanistan. And they decided to sanction the chief prosecutor and another official of the ICC who comes from Lesotho. Of course, there are other people there, but being Donald Trump, the racist that he is, he only targets those from Africa. Then states themselves who are signatories can also refer people who they consider who have committed crimes against humanity to the ICC. And then, of course, the ICC itself, on a recommendation from the chief prosecutor, can also indict somebody. So on the African continent, quite a few of the people who have appeared before the ICC were referred there by African countries' governments themselves. So sometimes there'll be this sort of backlash that, no, it seems it's only people from Africa who are being referred. Indeed, others should go, but some of them were referred.
Excellency. I remember not so long ago, the current president of Kenya as well. At one point, he was hauled before the ICC, and for some strange reasons, it was said that there wasn't enough evidence, and therefore he was off the hook.
Yes, well, that's exactly what happened. I mean, the thing is that at least he must be given credit, because he was named along with his current vice president, and they both voluntarily went and presented themselves to the ICC, and they appeared before them, and there was no evidence. But then that's what started another problem, you see, whereby we then saw the AU discussing the fact that should a sitting president have to appear before the ICC. And remember, we also got in trouble once again as Botswana to say that no, we think they should, because when you use your position as a leader, crimes against humanity, if you say you should wait until the term of the president ends, some of these leaders, they stay in office 10, 20, 30, 40 years. So when will justice ever be served if you say you're going to wait until he steps down? And in that interim period, people will also pass away, people will forget, so justice won't be served. But anyway, I think I took my hats off to them. They decided to go and appear unlike others.
Yeah.
You asked about Botswana.
Yeah, I can ask about I think what is your take on the contribution of Botswana? Mr. Hanana, I think be ready as well. I'd like to, just after His Excellency, we'll just get back to you to see if you are able to contribute as well. What has been your take with regards to I think the response from Botswana?
You mean currently?
Yes, currently, yes.
Well, that's the problem. There has been no response. That is the problem. I had hoped we had set in motion what would become a culture, a tradition, that if we consider ourselves a democracy, and you know my opinion that right now here in Botswana, we're seeing a decline in democracy. But if we consider ourselves a democracy, we should wish it for others, because we live in a global village. So well, it's not good enough. It's not good enough. It's not good enough for us just to say we are a democracy and we turn a blind eye when democracy is being violated in other countries. It is our responsibility to stand up for peoples in other countries where there is a deficit in democracy.
Thank you so much. Mr. Motshegwa as well. I don't know whether Mr. Hanana is able to make some comments at this particular time. I would love to give you an opportunity to be able to weigh in. Mr. Hanana?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Finally, you are audible now. You may go ahead. Just, I think where we are.
Okay.
We are
I think.
rounding. Yeah.
All right. Let me quickly run through a lot of issues because I have not been on for a while. But also, may I start by apologizing for the technical glitches that we had, and also thank the people of Botswana for the opportunity to spread the message of the crisis that we have as a people in Zimbabwe. And maybe may I also start as a way of introduction to introduce who Zimbabwe African People's Solidarity Network is, ZAPSON, which is the co-host of this event. We're a network of activists across Africa that feel there is a need for African countries to come in and solve the crisis that we have in Zimbabwe. So do we have a crisis in Zimbabwe? Yes, definitely we have a very big crisis that we are sitting on. And it would be foolish for us as a people in Africa to expect ZANU-PF to acknowledge that the people of Zimbabwe or the country Zimbabwe is in a crisis, because if you look into history, between 1981, 82 to 1986, we had over 20,000 people that died. And up to today, ZANU-PF refuses to acknowledge that that was a genocide. They refuse to acknowledge that that was a crisis. So to expect such a caliber of people to then turn around and say, when we don't have even 10,000 people that have died, to say we have a crisis, it means we are not going to get an acknowledgement from the government of Zimbabwe that there's a crisis. But what kind of crisis do we have as the people of Zimbabwe? I will need also to hasten to say, as you introduced me to say, I'm in exile. I'm not in Zimbabwe because of the issues that are happening in the country. On the 28th of July, we had state security, the army, the police, the CIO, and ZANU-PF thugs break into my home, pointing guns at my children and my wife, demanding to know my whereabouts. And this happens in independent Zimbabwe. 40 years after independence, it shows that we are indeed in crisis. So we have a crisis, number one, of constitutionalism. We have a government that has mixed priorities. We voted for a constitution that came into effect in the year 2013, and our government now is busy making sure that they reverse the will of the people and the aspirations of the people as enshrined in that constitution. Instead of aligning laws aligning the constitution to become law, they have decided to amend. I think we have a lot of clauses in the constitution that the government wants to amend before they come into effect. Before we have tried them to say this does not work or it works, government wants to amend the constitution. So that's the crisis that we have. Instead of prioritizing aligning, government is prioritizing amending. So we have a whole lot of clauses in the constitution.
Let me just extend your thought on that one, because we are here today. You've acknowledged, at least at the very least, a bit of an effort from Botswana in terms of at least being able to give you a bit of support. What has been your sense in terms of, getting the support from, let's say, for instance, your SADC, your regional support, as well as just the African continent and the international community at large? Do you sense that Zimbabweans are getting sufficient support, or you think it could be improved?
I think the greatest challenge in terms of the support that Zimbabwe should be getting, the challenge is that we need to first say to ourselves, what kind of support do we need at the moment? Because at the moment we have the ANC delegation that is coming to mediate. As an individual, I have a problem when you have a national crisis being solved at party level. I think that's the one thing that is disheartening. We cannot have an ANC delegation going to their sister revolutionary party to solve a Zimbabwe crisis. We need to separate the state from the party. Zimbabwe is not ZANU-PF. So if we are solving the issues of Zimbabwe, we need a South African or a SADC delegation, a delegation that is bigger than ANC. So I think that's the greatest thing that we must solve. And the other thing is we do not have confidence as a people in ANC.
It is your sense that you feel the South African government would, because it does hold quite a bit of clout within the region. So it is your sense that they are not maybe taking this matter as seriously as they should, hence the delegation.
Now, maybe let me give you a bit of background. Remember that we have had mediation from South Africa before, and we commend the government of South Africa for what they are doing. But the challenge that we have now is that we have ANC going to Zimbabwe, not to meet the people of Zimbabwe, but to meet ZANU-PF. How do you solve a crisis by engaging the perpetrator of the crisis? How do you solve a crisis by ignoring the victims of that crisis? How do you solve a crisis by engaging just one side of the stakeholders? Because we should have numerous stakeholders coming in. If you remember in 2008,
is it not that, Hanana, that at the very least, at least you're reaching out and saying, let us begin, you're broaching a bit of conversation to say, let us begin to have something. You may not necessarily know where it's going to end, but at least it's a start, isn't it?
Yeah, I think, don't get me wrong, we acknowledge the initiative. We acknowledge the initiative. But I was still giving you a bit of background to say, where do our fears emanate from? So I was saying to you that our fears emanate from the fact that we have this engagement at ANC ZANU-PF level. And these are the people that already have a brotherhood code by virtue of being a revolutionary party. And my other fear that I have is that ZANU-PF and the ANC, their ties, I don't know at what point they became solidified. But if you check after we got our independence in 1980, the ANC had always worked with ZAPU and not with ZANU-PF. The ZANU government of the time was persecuting this same ANC. We have cadres, ANC cadres that died in independent Zimbabwe during the reign of this same regime that you have that calls the Second Republic. So the ANC is a victim of the wrath of ZANU-PF. And in times past, they have failed to solve the Zimbabwe crisis to the satisfaction of the Zimbabwean people. They seem to have an understanding of some sort that we don't know with ZANU-PF, so that whatever they do at the end of the day seems to benefit their sister revolutionary party, and they seem to honor the revolutionary ties that they have. We need to be privy of these things. We need to acknowledge that these are realities that are there on the ground. So to avoid a situation where we have a delegation that has got a bias, we are calling for the broadening of the delegation that engages in Zimbabwe. We are not saying what the ANC is doing is wrong, but we are saying for the sake of effectiveness, let's broaden the delegation. Let's have it at a governmental level. Let it be multifaceted. Let's have more stakeholders involved. Let South Africa send even people from the justice system. Let South Africa send people from the opposition. Let South Africa send people from the civic space, so that all sectors of all stakeholders in Zimbabwe feel there's a group of people that can empathize with them. Because at the moment, the ANC is a revolutionary party with revolutionary ties with ZANU-PF. So ZANU-PF already gets empathy from the ANC. And we as the people of Zimbabwe, we feel we are not represented because our story is not being told. What we're going through is not being heard. So that is where we have a challenge.
I think those are very strong sentiments that I think you have shared there, Mr. Hanana. I'd like to pick His Excellency on your take with regards to what you've just, His Excellency, if I may, if you could just pick on what Mr. Hanana was saying as well. I mean, these are very strong sentiments with regards to the type of delegation, the type of intervention that I think would be needed in Zimbabwe.
Yes, I think, like he said, and what I said in my opening remarks,
Obakeng,
that, there had been...
Obakeng, my hand has been raised for long, man. Please, can we also...
Okay, let him speak. Let him speak.
Go ahead, Richard. I think His Excellency is you to have a say. I just want to exhaust the guests first, so that at least I could allow. But I think we've got about 15 or so minutes so that we can wind up. But Richard, you can go ahead, and I think you're the one who wished to have a comment. His Excellency gave way. Richard? Well, I think His Excellency, I think you can conclude your remarks now.
Hello? Obakeng?
Yes, you may go ahead, Richard. Yes.
Can I speak now?
Go ahead.
In Zimbabwe, we need a lot of people to be involved, or stakeholders. In addition of what Hanana has been saying, we also need the army of Zimbabwe to be on the negotiating table. They must tell the people of Zimbabwe what is it that they want from us. They've been embezzling themselves into the politics for quite a long time. On top of that, if the Zimbabwean army is being drawn or dragged to the table, to the negotiating table, these other countries which we are willing also them to come, like Botswana, Mozambique, and the SADC region, they must also be there with an element of army officials also, so that they will be able to talk to their counterparts, so that we can find out what is it that they want. Because just taking only opposition and the ZANU-PF and other civil society without the element of the army, we are wasting our time. The Zimbabwean army is a major stakeholder for everything which is happening in Zimbabwe. So that is only my my addition to Mr. Hanan's words.
All right, no, thank you very much. I think for your contribution. I think let me allow His Excellency to conclude his thoughts there, and then I'll go back to Jimba if I'm pronouncing it properly, so that you can have a say. I can see your hand as well there. His Excellency, if you can conclude your thoughts there.
So could you just indicate to me what particular area do you want me to cover?
I think you were still commenting on, I think what Mr. Hanana was saying, which with regards to the issue of delegation as well, because obviously he was highlighting the fact that I think we could do, we could do better in terms of the delegation that we sent to Zimbabwe, so that it is multifaceted. So I just wanted to just pick your brain on that.
No, of course, I think it goes without saying. In the past, when you've had mediation going to Zimbabwe, it was a SADC appointed mediator. Now, right now, we don't see that quite happening. We see South Africa trying to take the initiative for which they should be commended in trying to bring about a resolution to this crisis. But unfortunately, they're being rebuffed. They're being rebuffed, as I said earlier. Those first two who came as special envoys from President Ramaphosa were not even allowed to meet Nelson Chamisa and the MDC, and maybe there may be in other parties they were supposed to come into it. So they went back empty-handed. So then I think that's why this approach now of saying, okay, let's try it ruling party to ruling party. And that's why the ANC came. And then again, we saw the ZANU-PF official saying that, no, there's no conflict, there's no crisis. We have to talk about challenges that affect both countries. So he turned it from being a situation where they were coming to talk about the situation in Zimbabwe to now say, we are now talking and cooperating about challenges facing both our countries. So it just proves my point I was saying earlier on, that there is resentment of any kind of initiative to try to bring about a sense of bringing the parties together, because they feel they're the ones who are running the show. Only they must be spoken to. No one else in the country must be spoken to, because you only do that if there's a conflict, and they're saying there's no conflict. So just out of diplomatic consideration, they would then, withdraw, go back to South Africa and go and have to think how now they can pursue this. In the meantime, the situation in Zimbabwe is growing worse by the day.
Jimba, I think you wanted to say something as well. So I'll give you an opportunity as well to just give us a bit of your context via Jimba, if you may.
Thank you. Sorry, I raised my hand earlier, but
I apologize.
Let me just ask perhaps His Excellency a question that not only pertains to Zimbabwe, to all the crises that we have. I think you have tried a way of trying to resolve the crisis that we are talking about. But what other innovative ways are there? Because we cannot keep trying to do the same thing the same way and expect to get it different. So what's on the table? I think what's on the table next for everybody in the diplomatic community to solve not only the crisis in Zimbabwe, but all other crises that are there, whether they want to call it crisis or challenges, all a question of sentiments. But I'm asking ourselves, we have followed the normal diplomatic channels, which are perhaps ineffective. You referred to the cases of English-speaking Cameroon. So we have got so many. So what innovation are there? I think he now.
Right, no, I think we get the gist of the question. I think if Liberty RSA has a question as well, if it's a question that is directed to His Excellency as well, just to have a go, I'll allow that to be nice and brief, because we're just about to wrap up, so that at least we don't take too much of your time. Liberty RSA.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
All right. No, thanks for the platform. Thanks for the Botswana government for this and this solidarity.
The sound I think if you could kindly let me just move on to the next person. Kindly sort out your audio. I don't think it's the clearest. If I could just allow Mr. Hanana, I think you've got your hand up as well. If you could just quickly just have a word. I don't know whether you wanted to say something so that I can give His Excellency.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we must understand is that the people of Zimbabwe have been suffering under ZANU-PF for the last 38 years, if not 40 years. So we need Africa to come on board to make sure that we try and solve this thing as peaceful and as non-violent as possible. The reason why I am saying this is because there is a limit to the amount of state brutality that people can stomach from a government. There's a limit to how much people can be pushed by a government. If you go back to history, you'll discover that the colonial government was actually behaving the same way that this government is behaving. And over time, we began to see a series of events where people started defending themselves against a brutal government that becomes illegitimate because it has no rule of law. It has no constitution whatsoever. So I am foreseeing a scenario where, as the people of Zimbabwe, we are getting to a stage where we are saying, we need to start fighting back. We need to start resisting. So engagement is one way of saying, no, let's solve this thing without any force, without any violence. But when push comes to shove, our people are now ready to do whatever is necessary to be free from a government that has become illegitimate by virtue of how it deals with its citizens. We have a government that behaves like a terror organization. We have a government that behaves like a mafia, that preys on its citizens, that curtails rights. Let's make sure that its people have no freedom to express themselves. If you speak out, you are arrested, you are abducted, and at times you are disappeared or killed. The moment the government begins to behave like that, it is no longer a government. It's now a terror organization. We need our people to rise up and take back their country. And one way we can do that is when we engage other African countries to help us talk to this government terror organization. But if that fails, I foresee a scenario where people are going to rise up and begin to fight against this government using whatever means are necessary, and whatever means are necessary. And that will not be something that is good for the region, that is something that is not good for Africa. So we are calling on Africa to say, help us avoid civil unrest, a potential civil unrest. Help us avoid a civil uprising in Zimbabwe, because the people of Zimbabwe have had enough. The people of Zimbabwe have suffered for far too long. And the generation of our fathers that were afraid to rise up against this government have died. We have now a new crop of people that really did not experience Kukurahundi, that did not see the war. And they are willing and prepared to rise from the ground and take back the country from the people that have captured it. So I think that is one thing that I need to impress even on His Excellency, to say we are on the brink of violence, we're on the brink of an uprising in Zimbabwe, because our people have had enough. So we really appealing for a peaceful resolution and intervention so that we avoid the consequences of something, of any other form of engagement.
I think, His Excellency, I think that builds back, I think, to the question that I think was asked earlier by Richard as well. I think it's pretty much speaking to the same thing. If you may respond to them, I think both of them. As we draw close, because I'm only going to give you 10 minutes so that at least we may close the remarks after your response.
Yes, I think when he talked about what innovative intervention could be made, which would include the African continent, I'm so sorry to have to deflate your expectations, but had there ever been a time for the African continent, the AU, SADC, to have intervened, they would have done so. They should have done so by now. And recently, when you think of how much media attention has been put out there all over the world about what's going on in Zimbabwe, and still there has been no attempt by any international organization to become involved. Because
I think, His Excellency, you hit mute there, unaware. If you could just unmute yourself there so that at least we can hear you. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yeah, yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay. So I'm saying that even some of the countries in the West, even though it was always used, you know, by ZANU-PF, have now disengaged. You don't hear them talking out like they used to. So Zimbabwe seems to have been abandoned, because when something perpetuates, when it goes on forever and ever, you know, like the Syrian conflict, you know, eventually human nature is that it's just something you get used to, and you just say, oh yeah, there's those Zimbabweans again, you know, beating each other up, and nobody does anything about it. But if they were there living in Zimbabwe and could see and feel it and experience it for themselves, they would definitely have to intervene. So innovation, yes, we don't want violence in that country. And I think what should happen is that some of the political parties with civil society should come together and go on a round trip and go and visit. They should go and visit the capitals, starting off in the SADC region. The capitals in the SADC region, delegation, I cannot see how any government would refuse to meet with them, where they can lay out exactly what's going on in the country and say, if you don't do something, then the consequences that were being spoken to by one of your earlier speakers are likely to happen. And this would be terrible for the region. It would be worse for Zimbabwe. So I think getting on and engaging as soon as possible with a delegation of a representation, a cross-section of the society in Zimbabwe, to go to these leaders and then to report publicly what was the response and the reaction of the leaders in each of the countries or the governments in those countries. That will then name and shame those who are not prepared to stand up and say indeed something needs to be done, and starting with whoever is the chairman of SADC.
Sorry, I was just saying, Sonke, I can see that you've got your hand raised there. If you could just go ahead and have your remarks, so that I get my guests to make their closing remarks, because we are pretty much done. We've been at this for some time, so we are closing. Sonke, if you may.
Good evening. I would like just to make a remark on the progress of Zimbabwe, considering that most Zimbabweans seem to be going out into the neighboring countries. Is it then possible for the neighboring countries to sort of maybe see themselves as not being, not being out of the Zimbabwean crisis, but completely part of it? Because I'm looking at the situation in South Africa, where we've got quite millions of people over there. So it's now with the COVID around and jobs, everyone looking for jobs. We've got people fighting for a small bit of what is left in South Africa. So would the governments then consider that when they fight for Zimbabwe, they are fighting for their populations as well? Because already there is a lot of, overcrowding on the small resources that are left. So I don't know whether the president would maybe give advice to those who are holding posts at the moment to say, okay, if we don't solve this, it is our problem. We need to engage Zimbabwe. And if there is any engagement at all, would the countries maybe allow their countries to be sources of, springboards of the fight, just like what happened during the liberation struggle? Because Zimbabweans cannot fight from Zimbabwe right now. They can only fight from outside. So I'm looking at situations where maybe Zimbabweans would want to have...
I understand you very well. Are you saying you're looking for a situation where essentially Zimbabweans and the neighboring countries essentially, accepts, Zimbabweans as refugees basically in their own countries,
as
and maybe
refugees,
able to exert pressure from outside.
Yes, as refugees, and also as sort of, I would say, in court, people who are fighting for their freedom, just like what happened during the liberation struggles. People went to Zambia and lodged the war from there. So are we maybe at a stage where we need the countries to be more sympathetic and say these Zimbabweans really need our help? And
right. I think I get the gist. I think I get the gist of it, and I hope the president as well does get the gist of it. I would allow him to respond as I get the last remarks from my guest. From a president.
Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay. I didn't quite understand. Was the suggestion that, like during the days when the liberation movements came into neighboring states and then fought the war of liberation from there, is that what is being suggested? Is that what is being suggested now?
Yes, that's what I am suggesting, but I'm not suggesting it in a literal way that it's a real fight where you carry guns. I'm suggesting it in the sense of logistics of trying to free Zimbabwe.
Okay. Now, I just want to point out to you, earlier on you talked about South Africa and the millions of there. There are more Zimbabweans in South Africa than the population of Botswana. That just goes to show you how many are there. And when you talk about logistics and trying to help and what have you, you're going to find very few countries who are going to do anything to provide logistics which may be interpreted as undermining the authority of the current regime in Zimbabwe. They won't do that.
That was Pifi, President. I think let me just quickly, before you make the last remarks, let me just go back to Motshegwa and then take Dr. Mosweunyane and Mr. Hanana in that particular order, and then His Excellency as the last to make your closing remarks just under 3 minutes, if you may. Motshegwa.
All right, thank you very much. The message that we can send to Zimbabwean government is that sovereignty comes with political responsibility and upholding of democratic principles. And the lesson that we can learn as African citizens is that we need a strong international civic society. At country level, we need effective constitutions, just laws and functional institutions to keep any government of the day in check, because man is fallible and bound to abuse power when bestowed with it without mechanisms of checks and balances. And that politics cannot be left to politicians alone, as they will mess up the country while citizens are passive and disinterested in the arena of politics. And lastly, we say, as part of Way Forward, we call on civic society in Botswana, Southern Africa to unite and be in solidarity with the workers and the people of Zimbabwe. And we call on the government of Botswana to come out of hiding and condemn the bloodthirsty Mnangagwa and his regime, and further lobby leaders in SADC and Africa to decisively miscommunicate bad leaders in the country of Zimbabwe. And lastly, we convey our love to our brothers and sisters in Zimbabwe, and we offer them solidarity and wish that one day they shall have peace, harmony, tranquility, and everlasting joy. The struggle continues.
Thank you very much, Motshegwa. Dr. Mosweunyane.
I think in closing, we've just got to appreciate the efforts that you've employed in getting us to discuss this issue. And I think this shouldn't be the end of it, but instead the start of things to come. We have got to amplify the voice and be in solidarity with the people of Zimbabwe and make sure that Zimbabwean crises are taken as a priority. And of course, this therefore needs a call for the engagement of the civil society, of Zimbabweans in the diaspora. They've got to help in any way they can, including having to part with their resources to make sure that they get to support any cause that's geared towards the liberation and the reforms that are necessary in their own country. And of course, I have to say there is need for continuous engagement. And we have got, therefore, not to only look at the ruling parties within the SADC region to help out in this crisis. I think there has to be a roadmap. There must be a time frame. We have not just got to be saying we're going to do something. We will help where we can without stipulates that indicate when that should be done. And of course, if SADC does fail, we have got to amplify our voice and call for support, even from other institutions, and not only in the region, but in the whole continent, and those that exist internationally, like the democratic institutions that exist in the West. And at the end, we have to see Zimbabwe free, because if it's free, then we will forge ahead and get to realize the mandate that has been put before institutions like SADC, organizations and entities like SADC, that is of developing the continent. And the continent, if it goes on with this kind of problems not being solved, it would lead to anarchy. And if it goes that direction, it means therefore that SADC would have failed to fulfill its measure. And then the confidence will also be lost in such entities to ever exist to help. So it is very important that we've got to take Zimbabwean crisis as a priority and make sure that at the end of the day, they are well amplified. And of course, even the elderly, people who are served, like the former president, has to play a role in getting to bring forth his views on how these problems can be solved. I think at the end of it, I've got to commend you for this initiative and say it has to continue until at the end we have realized what we intend for Zimbabwe, because the peaceful Zimbabwe will result in us getting our brothers and sisters back to their country, those who have migrated to foreign countries, so that they can be involved, they can be fully participating in the development of their country. If Zimbabwe then gets developed, it goes then to say Africa will also be developed. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mosweunyane. And then we give it to Mr. Hanana, your closing remarks there as well. And then we hand it over to the former president to make his last closing remarks.
Okay, thank you so much. I think what I have to say is to say thank you to Botswana for coming on board under this Zapson initiative, where we are getting African states to really put pressure on the Zimbabwe government. The reason being, when it's initiatives from Europe, we are then towards the regime change agenda sponsored by the West. So we are now calling for Africa. So what we would ask for from here is that like next month again, we're going to be having this same discussion, maybe hosted by a different country. We're still finalizing which one. So we need to amplify the story of Zimbabwe. We need Africa to help us to hold ZANU-PF accountable for the people that are dying, that are being disappeared, that are being abducted. We also need pressure on the ZANU-PF government to remove the army from the streets. If ZANU-PF really feels that, I mean, if they think they have a mandate or from the people to govern, they should not be afraid of the people. But the challenge that we have now is that we have an army that is a political party. In times past, we had a political party that had an army, but Zimbabwe now is under a military state. So we need pressure on the Zimbabwean government to make sure that the army goes back to the barracks, and then the people can exercise their freedoms without the interference of the army. If anything, the army must support what the people are doing. Like we saw in 2017, there were people marching in the streets supporting a coup, and the army stood by and took the side of the people. Let's do a test in Zimbabwe and see what is it that the people want. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And then in closing as well, let me just afford former president as well to make his last closing remarks.
Thank you very much. I would like to close by saying that I call upon SADC to urgently convene a special summit on Zimbabwe so as to bring about change through constructive and ongoing engagement in that country. If SADC does not do that, then they are equally responsible for the suffering that is taking place in that country. I also call upon civil society in every SADC country to mobilize and confront their governments to get engaged with the situation that is taking place in Zimbabwe. We need to have on this continent a culture of accountability in Africa for all Africans in order to deal with crises like we have in that country, Zimbabwe. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I think let me also take this opportunity as well to thank every one of you who have participated. In particular, I'd like to extend my appreciation to His Excellency, the former President of the Republic of Botswana, Dr. Seretse Khama, and also extend the same to Dr. Mosweunyane for your time and your expertise, and indeed, Mr. Motshegwa, for your heartfelt solidarity message as well with the people of Zimbabwe, and indeed, Mr. Hanana. We thank you so much, and we can only wish the people of Zimbabwe very well, and we can assure you that the people of Botswana definitely are with you. And indeed, we know that at this time when there is COVID-19, the challenges are even bigger, over and above the usual challenges that Zimbabweans face on a daily basis. You can be rest assured that the people of Botswana, irrespective of party colors, irrespective of the association, indeed have your back. So we are here. Feel free to call on the people of Botswana to be able to give you the practical support that you are looking for. Over and above that, thank you so much for everyone else who took part here, who participated here, and others who were just here, wouldn't get an opportunity to be able to participate. Until next time, thank you so much, and God bless.